Hello and welcome back, and that's right, today we are looking at the Synology DS224, a NAS arguably I've talked about on the channel quite a lot in the last few weeks. Ever since we heard about this blooming device, we've been thinking to ourselves, is it worth our money and our data? And because of the way Synology have changed their portfolio in the last 12 to 18 months, although some devices have come out of it looking pretty darn good, it's arguable that the DS224 is not a NAS that has pleased everyone. Now, right now we are working on our long review coming up soon, but before we do that, just like we do with all of our big reviews, we also do a short version in this, the before you buy. And in this video, I'm going to help you decide whether the Synology DS224 Plus deserves your money and your data by giving you 5 reasons why you should consider getting it, and another 5 reasons why you might want to look elsewhere or continue to sit on the fence a little bit longer. So without further ado, let's crack on with number 1. Probably one of the earliest reasons that a lot of you that have been sitting on the fence waiting for a Synology that might opt for this device will go for it is simply because it has integrated graphics, something that Synology in more recent months or even the last year and a half have slowly made the tippy toes away from. Integrated graphics are not going to be great for everything when it comes down to it in a lot of file transmission and your backups. Just simple file transfer speed is going to be prioritous to many. There are a handful of processes where having integrated graphics inside your NAS is going to be advantageous. Now, why is that? That is because a CPU is going to be geared towards certain processes more than others. But moreover than that, the integrated graphics inside a CPU means that there is a component built into the CPU that is better suited to graphical tasks. Now, some graphical tasks are more obvious than others. You know, dealing with larger photos, some of the AI recognition stuff that we talked about. But probably more than anything else, it's going to be the conversion of multimedia. That is kind of the big, probably heavier use than anything else of integrated graphics on NAS systems. And in this system scale and its price point of about 239 to 269 Nika, depending where you're buying in the world and your tax and your shipping, it makes it one of the most accessible, lower priced, current generation, I hate seagulls, Synology NASes out there with integrated graphics. And if you have a large collection of 1080p and 4K media that for one reason or another you need to reconvert into different formed media, be it because you're accessing it on a limited bandwidth, accessing it on a device that doesn't support a file format or compression technique like H.265, or you have a denser, more populated network environment where lots of devices are clients are communicating with the device via Plex, Video Station, MD Jellyfin, and need files suitably changed, and that goes for audio as well when you look at things like FLAC and MP4A. Integrated graphics and that hardware transcoding engine that is inclusive and useful within integrated graphics in so much more an efficient way than raw CPU power trying to get the job done will make the DS224 Plus more appealing to those kind of users. But of course, another reason you're probably looking at this is because it involves and includes Synology's Disk Station Manager DSM platform, and it is by far and by quite a comfortable margin, at least as far as the current generation of Synology NAS that you can buy go, it is the lowest price point you can pay for access to the complete range of applications and services from Synology in DSM 7.2. Yes, there are cheaper NASes than this in the Value series and in the J series, and they can access 70 to 80% of the catalogue from Synology in DSM, but this is the lowest entry point to allow you to access everything. What do I mean everything? I'll list the things that aren't included on the lower, more affordable platforms. That would be volume encryption. That would be immutable backups with write once, read many support. That will be virtual machine deployment. That will be full and unfettered container support. That would be access to the active backup suite range of applications for backing up, synchronized on-prem and cloud backups as well as integration in things like SaaS services like Google Workspace and Office 365. You then got access to that transcoding engine I mentioned earlier on, which means Plex deployment on this is going to be good, but also when you use Synology's own Synology Photos application with AI-powered photo and face and object and subject recognition, then you've got Video Station with access to the transcoding, and when you're using the audio application services, access to the converting of audio files as well. Then you've got the full range of support services and extra add-ons for things like the collaboration suite for mail, for chat, for Office, for Drive. Then you've got the surveillance application to support way more cameras. And if you're going to be using Synology's own AI Edge cameras, this will allow you to better integrate that into a smoother Surveillance Station 9.1 experience. What I'm saying is, if you're buying into the Synology platform for that software that makes up a decent whack in the price point, this is the lowest price entry point to have all of it. Another thing that this is the lowest bar for entry across the whole of Synology's catalogue and portfolio is access to 2 gig of memory that can be upgraded. Whenever you look at the Synology portfolio of lots of devices, one of the things that becomes very apparent, particularly for those that like scalability in their solutions, is as soon as you go to the more affordable systems, the affordable systems at the bottom tend to have much less memory, sometimes as low as half a gig, 512 meg, but generally around the 1 or 2 gig limit. But the other thing they lack is the ability to upgrade the memory. This has 2 gig off the bat of DDR4 and it can be scaled up, so which is great news overall. And for me personally, it makes it one of the main reasons why, in terms of users that are looking for a nice solid base to work from in DSM, as an affordable point, the DS224 Plus, or where it lives in a portfolio, will make it very desirable to users that are going to graduate the number of users and simultaneous services communicating with the device granularly over time. Talking of things that have changed with Synology in the last 12 to 18 months, their position on compatibility and support of third-party drives ever since they rolled out their own range of SATA hard drives for enterprise, for regular users, NVMe, SATA SSDs. Ever since that rolled out, we've seen an increasing, decreasing, I should say, really, of hard drives and SSDs that are compatible with their systems. And as you go higher up the portfolio and you get into the more enterprise level systems, you start to see only Synology drive media on those compatibility lists. Well, I'm pleased to say that there is support and compatibility on the official pages on this for Seagate, for WD, for Toshiba. You're not just limited to their own storage media. And even then, they haven't even included enterprise media from their own range on that compatibility list. They stuck by their guns and said enterprise media from them only for enterprise level systems, which at least shows that those compatibility lists have an element of sensibility about them, but more on that later. Now, this next point, a few people are going to disagree with me on this, and there is an argument for and against it, but I do think there are going to be a body of users that like the fact that they're buying a system that Synology, a brand people buy almost exclusively for the software over the hardware. The advantage that Synology will have using a CPU that's inside here, the J4125, that they've had a vast amount of experience with. One of the things we've noticed, particularly in the last few months, as Synology has made the jump on a number of their systems from Intel to AMD and Celerons onto embedded Ryzons, is it's always the Intel systems that seem to get all of the updates, services and features first, and the reason being because they've got a wealth of experience on that platform. Recently, when Synology rolled out support of AI subject and object recognition in their photo application, Synology Photos, there's something that had already been provided in the past in Synology Moments. One of the reasons for that delay was adding that feature to their new generation of hardware. And although it rolled out with complete compatibility when they rolled out the feature on the Intel platforms, its support on things like the AMD Ryzen series at release was spotty, and they ended up turning this Synology Photos object recognition from a everyone's got access to it to a staged release. And what that means is they're having to tinker and tool with the CPUs and architecture that they've got less experience with, and therefore delaying the release of these updates. Whereas the CPU inside this, the J4125, that they've been using in systems for the last 3, close to 4 years, they have a wealth of experience with it, and therefore they're able to make the most and gear and get the most out of every single gigahertz out of it, and allow newer iterations and improvements in DSM to be compatible on this platform that bit quicker. But those are 5 reasons you might go for it, but it's not going to be for everyone. So now we're going to go through 5 reasons why you might want to give the Synology DS224 Plus a miss. It's going to seem weird, right, after saying some nice things about Synology using that CPU and the benefits it brings, to suddenly go full neg. But it's inevitable because, let's face it, one of the earliest criticisms that myself and other people online made against the DS224 Plus as its specifications became clear was that the CPU inside that is really showing its age. The J4125 in there is an Intel Celeron 2.0 GHz processor that can be burst up to 2.7 when needed. It's integrated graphics at 350 MHz to 700 or 750 when needed there. But it was a 2019 released Intel Celeron processor there that even Intel themselves have moved beyond and integrated the newer generation N5105 and J6412 range of CPUs. They've refreshed their own run over at Intel, and Synology's competitors from brands like QNAP from Asus, or even the more affordable TerraMaster, have all moved over in their 2023-2024 series to a newer generation Celeron. But Synology have stuck here with a CPU that everyone else has moved forward from. Now, in their slight defense, it has to be said that this CPU they've got inside here used to be in their fully featured premium range for prosumer, and now in this iteration it's been moved into their more affordable, accessible home tier range. Now, that means that CPU is still better than the quad core that came before it, in the dual core that came before it in the DS220 Plus, released 3 years ago, but still nonetheless, it's still the same CPU series, and it's effectively the same CPU as its predecessor with a few little tweaks and quad core instead of dual. It's a very small jump. And overall, that CPU really is showing its age when right now Intel themselves have turned their back on it. So that if you're looking for future-proofing in your hardware, and if you're one of those users that's buying Synology but still want the most for your hardware, that may well put you off quite a lot. And talking of hardware options that might put you off, it has to be said that in terms of storage scalability on this, in a couple of very key ways, this is going to disappoint you, particularly when you compare it against a number of other recent Synology releases. First and foremost, there's a complete lack of M2 NVMe bays. This does not have the M2 bays on the base, unlike the DS723, unlike the DS923, unlike the DS720, unlike the DS423 Plus. In fact, given this is a Plus Series box, this is one of the few Plus Series boxes released from the brand in the last 2 years that doesn't have M2 NVMe's in a desktop form, which is a real shame, particularly when you can get this same CPU, same memory, same network connectivity, all of that from a NAS 3 years ago called the DS720 Plus that you can pick up pretty darn cheap online. And moving beyond that lack of M2 NVMe, again, for pools or using as caching, the system also completely lacks any kind of eSATA upgradability. So that lack of eSATA expansion support means you can't add more storage. So you're lacking the ability to add NVMe's for caching or storage and the ability to add more storage later. Again, 2 features that were included in the DS720 3 years ago with the same hardware. And at that point, it was only 100 nick or more. And I'm sure now, 3 years on, second-hand or ex-refurb, you're getting it for cheaper or less than this. Next up, for all of that praise I gave earlier on about this system arriving with both 2 GB of memory and that memory being expandable, it has to be added that that memory slot inside there that memory slot only allows a single 4 gig upgrade. You can only add a 4 gig memory module in there, which is really disheartening for two reasons. One, the initial 2 gig in there is soldered. You can't remove it. So the 2 gig that arrives with, you can't even just remove that and replace it with a 4, and therefore with the extra bay allow you to have up to 8 gig of memory. Why is that a big deal? Well, it goes on to my second reason. This CPU, the Intel J4125, supports up to 8 gig. So that 6 gig maximum is artificially in place because of Synology. They could have rolled it out with 4 gig out the bat. They could have put that 2 gig inside on a removable SODIMM. It might have been a bit wasteful, but still nonetheless it would have been there. But this way, you've got 2 gig you can't remove, and you're pairing a 2 gig with a 4 gig stick, which anyone that's worked in an IT background for a while knows is less than great. You should always pair your modules and make them the same. Now, yes, Synology do recommend using their own modules, which are clearly going to have been designed and profiled to work in conjunction with that memory, the flash memory on board for the 2 gig, but still nonetheless, it's really annoying that there is this semi-artificial memory cap of 6 gig on a NAS, which has architecture that could support up to 8. Talking of artificial caps, we've got to talk about this, the fact that this system arrives with 2 1 gig Ethernet ports that are on the rear. Now, on the one hand, it's good to have 2 ports. You can bond them together with link aggregation, port trunking, or the quite popular now and very easy to use SMB multi-channel. That also gives you a failover connection as well in case one falls over. But the fact they're both gigabit Ethernet means that even if you combine them and get 2 gig, that's a real shame in 2023 when the average, even domestic hard drive you can buy these days will give you between 160 and 200 megs, and SATA SSDs will give you 400 to 500 meg on a good day, and particularly when you put them in a RAID, that's going to be fantastic. Now, we mentioned earlier on making comparisons between Synology and some of their competitors in the 2023-2024 generation, and all of the other brands have rolled out 2.5 gig, some of them even 5 gig connections. And the fact that this has got 1 gig in 2023 when every other brand is rolling out 1 gig, 2.5 gig connections at the same or lower cost is really disappointing. Now, there are going to be people watching this saying 2.5 gig network connections is a fad. It's unnecessary. Most domestic routers arrive with 1 gig and 2.5G routers aren't that common. And that's true. But they're actually not that rare either, and the majority of modern Wi-Fi 6 routers, Wi-Fi 6E routers, and with rising internet speeds exceeding that of gigabit connectivity, we're seeing a lot more 2.5 gig connections on network switches, on routers. Even Synology's own router had 2.5 gig because they had to acknowledge that greater than gigabit internet speeds are a thing. On top of that, the production costs of 2.5 gig, actually buying the NICs that go, the network interface card and ports that go on these things, the price difference between 1 gig and 2.5 gig NICs is so small that a brand not including it is definitely intentional. And even if your network connection isn't using 1 gig, greater than 1 gig connections at the moment, well, you go ahead and buy $15 to $20 USB to 2.5 gig network adapters that allow you to turn your Windows machine and Mac machines as well to interface on 2.5 gig either directly. If one of those ports had been 2.5 gig on its own, it would have given greater network speeds even on one port than those two combined, without reliance on bonding procedures again like link aggregation or SMB multi-channel. Then you can look at things like this that add a Wi-Fi 6 connection, which is 1.2 gigabit to 1.8 gigabit depending on your network protocol and multiple adapters, allowing wireless connectivity that is greater speed than 1 gig. Then you've got now 15 and 20 gig Wi-Fi 6E connectors there. 15 to 20 quid for adding Wi-Fi 6E and a complete 160 megahertz wireless band to play with here with a Wi-Fi 6 router. And the whole time, your NAS is going to be limited by these gigabit connections here. And if you've got greater than gigabit internet speeds, if you've got, 1.2, you're running fiber, 1.5, even 2 in some rare cases. If you've got those speeds, you would then have the potential to communicate with your host system with your Google Drive or remote cloud at a faster speed than with the system in your network environment that you can directly connect with has the potential to be slower than connecting remotely via the internet. That is why 1 gig port is such a damn shame on this system when 2.5 gig ports cost effectively nothing more. And on top of that, we're seeing every other part of the network and internet industry move forward onto higher bandwidth. Worse still, Synology doesn't even support putting USB network adapters into this. You can't even add any of those USB adapters to this to increase the network speed, and it doesn't have any kind of PCIe upgrade like the DS224 Plus has there to add 10 gig as well. Ultimately, network expandability on this is nil. And lastly, once again, just like I gave praise earlier on to things about this device, the DS224's compatibility and support list of third-party brands, it's worth highlighting that at launch, the range of third-party hard drives from Seagate and WD are really small. If you go to that page again, this might be a point that changes over time and therefore becomes invalidated when you're watching this. But right now, there are 7 supported Seagate drives. There are, 8 supported Seagate drives, 7 supported WD drives, 30 odd, I think 36 or 38 Toshiba drives on there, and a bunch of Synology hard drives supported on there. There is no support of larger hard drives than about 14 TB, even though currently we've seen 18, 20 and even 22 TB hard drives work on the Synology platform. We've tried it before, and that lack of a more evolved compatibility list is really disappointing. Now, if we gave them the benefit of the doubt and said that they're taking it incredibly seriously and they only want to verify drives they know work and they want to be that diligent about it, if we gave them the benefit of the doubt there, that would be okay. But the problem is, as mentioned earlier, they know this hardware architecture. They've used this CPU for a while. They've used those 2 gig memory soldered on board before. They've tested in DSM 7.2 before. I'm willing to bet the controller board inside this is near enough identical to that was utilized in the DS720 Plus and indeed the likes of the DS423 Plus. And ultimately, if you look at the compatibility list on those devices, the 423 Plus has the same rigid and very narrow compatibility on those 7 and 8 drives from WD and Seagate, and the DS720 Plus has an enormous compatibility list despite their hard drives there, the tested hard drives being on the same architecture. And that once again gives way to this idea of a curated and artificially minimized compatibility list. I'm glad there's support of Seagate and WD and more on there, but there just isn't very many at launch, and it seems like it's been done on purpose. Now again, this might change. This might be that Synology in waves and phases add supported hard drives and SSDs to that list, and therefore this may be completely invalidated if Synology have updated those lists accordingly. But at least for now, at launch, there just isn't a lot of hard drives and SSDs on that compatibility list, regardless of support of third parties. I hate seagulls, and ultimately that might be one of the reasons you don't go for this device. But this has been before you buy on the Synology DS224 Plus. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Are you going for this? Have you enjoyed the comparisons? Have I missed something that you guys think I should have? Do you disagree with me about 2.5 gig on this box, or maybe the other points? Let me know below. Other than that, thank you so much for watching. There'll be links to guides and comparisons on this device and a full review when it's live. If you need help with the right solution for you, please use our free advice service there on the right hand side of every page at NAS Compares. Use the free community forum if you want a more broader question answered and go through the history of older questions that we've been asked. Use our Discord if you want to have more of a social one-to-one with a number of other members of our community and ourselves. And finally, if you found this video helpful, and if you were going to buy a product that we've talked about here on the channel, this video or others, and you were going to use one of the retailers linked below, please use those links to take you there. It will cost you nothing extra to use them. You don't lose anything by it. It takes you to your local store, and anything you buy, and I mean anything you buy, results in a small fee returning to me here and Eddie here at NAS Compares. It doesn't cost you any extra. It's the same thing for everyone. And by doing so, you support me and Eddie. It's just me and here at NAS Compares, and it allows us to keep making videos every day and keep doing articles every day and run the free advice section. It's a passive way to support content creators like us, but do not use those links if you didn't find this video helpful and you weren't going to go to those shops anyway. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.